there. Some good friends of the museum. We're very, very happy to have them back tonight. Let me tell you, it provides a platform for storytellers to share their latest works, and where they can also offer valuable feedback to other storytellers. So I'll actually go ahead and turn it over to Clint, let him tell you all that.
All right, thank you. All right, thank you, Garrett. It's a pleasure to be here. As Garrett said, my name is Clint Atwater, and I live right here in Roanoke, the heart of these Blue Ridge Mountains. Now I say that like that was the plan. That was not the plan. The plan in April of 2008 was Myrtle Beach. 2 families, 2 minivans, 2 weeks. We had spent the night let me back up. I'm a pharmacist by trade. Went to pharmacy school, moved down here in April of 2009, but I'll get to that. But I've spent the majority of my career in pharmacy administration, primarily in hospitals. Climbing, managing, metrics, doing more and more. I was pretty good at it. But I realized that it was taking something from me, a little bit at a time. And that's why this vacation, I needed this vacation so much. We had spent the night in Hillsville, got up, ate breakfast, loaded everybody back in the minivan, and we're driving and we're coming up to Fancy Gap. Fancy Gap. What is Fancy Gap? We crested that ridge, and oh my, that valley just opened up in front of me. My wife, who's sitting here in the audience, had a few words to say. Eyes on the road, please. I looked at her out of the side, and I said, the road's not going anywhere. But these mountains, this valley, the ridges, I could tell they were blue and green, and the haze was just settling into that valley. I knew then why they were called the Blue Ridge Mountains. It wasn't because somebody named it that on a map. No, it's because they were blue and there were ridges that went on forever. I remember thinking to myself, well, I guess I didn't really think it to myself. I must have said it out loud, but what I said half under my breath was, I could live in these mountains. What clearly was not half under her breath was the statement, I will follow you anywhere but the mountains. Eyes on the road, please. These mountains, they was calling me. And I didn't know what it was, but there was something, there was that draw. These Appalachian mountains. Hold it right there, fella. Did you all hear that? I say, hold it right there. It's Appalachian mountains. If you're going to say it, you best be saying it right. It's Appalachian mountains. I throw an apple at you, or you got an itch, you got to scratch it. It's Appalachian mountains. I said, okay, Appalachian. Close, Appalachian. Oh, okay. Well, thank you. Who are you? Oh, well, I'm Jack. Always been Jack. That's what my mama called me. It's good enough for her, it'd be good enough for you. My name's Jack, and I grew up here in these mountains. Mama and me, we was poor as dirt, twice as common. But this here is my home, and if you're going to be talking about it, you best be saying it right. Now, how do you say it? Appalachian. Can you all say that with me? Appalachian. Thank you. So, we made our way down to Myrtle Beach, 2 weeks, sitting by the pool, having fun, enjoying ourselves. But then it was time to go back to work. It's always time to go back to work. I realized that there was something that was happening inside of me. Something had been eating away at me for a long time. Had been giving up more and more of it as time went on. I came to realize that that thing was what I call Grumpy Bear. Now, that's not what anybody else called me. That's what I called myself after I realized what was going on. And I didn't much care for Grumpy Bear. Well, I can tell you a little bit about myself if you'd like to hear. Yeah, I think I would. I need a good story. Jack, do you have a good story? I sure do. This is what I told you already. We was poor, didn't have much. Mama, she told me that I needed to take old Milky White, take her down to the market. It's time to sell her. She wasn't producing milk anymore. She wasn't good for nothing. Needed to take her down and sell her, get what I could for her. And so I did. I grabbed a hold of her and we started walking on down the road. Off in the distance saw this fellow and he came walking up pretty good speed to us. Well, hello, Jack. Do I know you? Well, no, Jack, you don't know me, but I've got something I think you might like. All right, well, I gotta take my cow to the market. Oh, Jack, I got something better here. Look right here. I got me some wonder beans. Wonder beans? What you mean, wonder beans? It's how you plant them before sunset. And in the morning, something magical, something extraordinary will happen. It'll leave you wondering just what happened. Well, I thought to myself, I said, well, that sounds pretty good. So I smashed up those beans. Didn't want him to change his mind now. Handed him Milky White, and I headed on back home. I got home, and there was Mama, and I said, Mama, look. She looked at them beans. She looked at me. She looked back at them beans. She snatched them up, went over to the window, threw them out into the yard. Sent me to bed without no supper. Didn't want to mess back with Mama, though. You didn't talk back to Mama. She sent you, you win. And so I went to bed. I was lying there in the dark, and I was hungry, and I got to wondering. I wonder, what is going to happen with those beans? They were thrown out the window. Would something happen? I don't know, but I was wondering. You ever reckon you know anything about that? He said to me. Yeah, I know a little bit about that. I went back to work and wasn't too much after that. I quit my job. Just up and quit. I had had enough. Now that's not something that I would recommend. I found another job. It was different. It was okay. But I realized that the system was still the system. There was still that pull, that demand. And it ate at me. And I didn't know for sure what I needed to do, but I knew that I needed to make a change. Well, Jack, he got up the next morning and he went outside. He looked up. Oh, it was green. It was big. No, it wasn't big. It was ginormous. He looked up there, and Mama came out there next to me, and she looked up. She didn't say nothing. She just shook her head, went back into the house to make breakfast. Well, me, I started climbing. Started climbing up there. I had to find out what was up there. And so I got up there, and I started looking down, and well, the house, it was getting smaller and smaller, and the yard, it was getting smaller and smaller. And I looked up, and I looked down. I decided I had come this far. I might as well just keep on climbing. So I kept climbing and climbing. Pretty soon, I broke through that cloud barrier. And I looked, and over there off in the distance was the biggest house I'd ever seen. And that house had the biggest door I'd ever seen. Well, I went up and I knocked on that door as loud as I could. And the lady of the house, she came and she opened that door and she looked at me. And I must have looked hungry because she invited me in for some breakfast. And that sounded good because I hadn't had supper and I hadn't had breakfast. So I was right hungry. And so she was kind of nervous and looking around. And all of a sudden, I heard this rumbling. Fee, fi, fo, fum. Well, she snatched me up, put me in the oven fast as could be. But that oven, it was cracked just a little bit. And the biggest giant I'd ever seen came in and he sat down. He grabbed his bag of gold and he started counting them coins. Oh, he was happy. He was just counting the coins and counting the coins. Well, pretty soon, those eyelids of his, they started getting heavy. And well, he fell asleep. I knew that was my chance. And so I snuck out of the oven, went over and grabbed that bag of gold, and I ran back to that beanstalk just as fast as I could. Climbed back down that beanstalk and got home. And Mama was there and I showed it to her. Now gold's good. Gold spends. We ate good for a while. But I knew I was going to have to go back. Bet you know something about that, he said to me. Reckon you know? Yeah, I knew. I had that new job. It wasn't too long. I was getting antsy for something. And I got the phone call from a recruiter. Said, I got a position that I think you'd be interested in. It's in Roanoke, Virginia. I said, well, where's Roanoke, Virginia? He says, well, it's in the Blue Ridge Mountains. The Blue Ridge Mountains? I said, well, all right, let me go home and talk to my family. So I got home and my son and my wife were there. My daughter, she was next door playing. And so I pulled them together and I said, I got a call today. And they're like, yes. I said, well, it was from a recruiter. Yes. Well, there's a job that they would like me to think about. Okay. Well, it's in the mountains. Well, we think you should apply. I didn't give them a chance to change their mind. I said, I'm going to go call the recruiter fast as I can. I got out headed down the hallway and I heard through the wall, my wife saying to my son, did we just tell your father to apply for a job in the mountains? Well, the interview went well and they were going to bring me down for a on-site visit. But somewhere between that first phone call and the on-site visit, I got laid off. I got the job, or I got the offer. Making that decision was pretty easy, all things considered. We were moving to Roanoke. We were moving to the mountains. Mm-hmm. Now, I knew that I had to go back up that beanstalk because that gold, it spends, but when it's gone, it's gone. And I had seen something up there that I knew I just had to have. It was this hen, beautiful hen, and she laid golden eggs. All the giant would say is, lay, hen, lay. And she'd pop out a golden egg. And I knew that I had to have something that would sustain us. And I had to go get that hen. So I climbed back up that beanstalk just as fast as I could. Weren't nobody home. So I walked in, I grabbed that hen just as fast as I could, and back down I came. I got down and I presented it to Mama. She looked at it, nodded, didn't say much. Mama didn't have a whole lot to say. But she did tell me that I was going to have to tend to it. So I have to tend to it. What do you mean? Well, you got to take care of that hen. It's not just going to lay if you're not taking care of it. And that's the thing that, everybody wants to just get to the story about the gold without realizing that you got to tend to these things. And these things take time. Reckon you know something about that. Well, I did. I knew something about that. Roanoke was home now, and I was enjoying it, and we were adjusting, figuring life out. But I heard something off in the distance, and I wasn't sure what it was, but I had heard a sound that had me wondering. Now, it wasn't Grumpy Bear. I had got rid of Grumpy Bear. I had made the decision that when we moved into the house, Grumpy Bear was not coming with us. I figured he could go off into these here mountains and he was done climbing and pursuing, and he could go over and he could have a good life out there in the mountains, but he wasn't coming with us. But we got down here and there was something. I heard something. Well, I heard something too. I heard the most beautiful sound. And that third climb, that was the most dangerous, I tell you. But I had to have it. I attended to that hen, but there was something about that music. That music that harp played, it was beautiful. I had to have that harp. And so I climbed back up there, went in. Giant, he was asleep, and he slept a lot. But that giant, he was asleep in there, and there she was, that beautiful harp. Well, I snuck as quiet as I could over there to get her. And then I grabbed a hold, and you know what she did? She started singing, woke that giant up fast as could be. Well, that giant, he looked and wiped his eyes, and I took that harp under my arm, and I started running just as fast as I could. And that giant, he was lumbering after me. And well, I got to the beanstalk, and I started climbing down fast as I could. Mama, get the axe. Mama went and got the axe, and I swung, and down came that beanstalk. But I had the harp. Reckon you know something about that. Yeah, Jack was right. I knew something about that. I had heard that music, that allure, something was out there. And it was calling me. Well, what ended up calling me was the University of Michigan, offering me a position as an associate director at the University of Michigan, my alma mater. The title that I had wanted for 25, or since I was 25. The prestige, the salary, Michigan. I came home, told the family about it. My son looks at me, he says, he was 20 now. He had grown up in Roanoke, was becoming a man in Roanoke. And he looks at me, he says, Dad, you, Mom, Sis, you can go. I'm staying here. Mm. 3 words. I'm staying here. That hit hard. Wasn't too much of a decision. I knew that I had my harp. The music was my family. I called Michigan and said, no, I won't be coming. I'll be staying here. But I knew there was one more rung on that ladder to pursue. It was a director position right here. Came open. They gave it to somebody else. Now, Jack, he cut down that beanstalk himself. But me, I had that beanstalk cut down from underneath me while I was still on the ladder. And down I fell. But I had a choice. I could either look at the rubble of everything that had been destroyed, the mess that it had made, or else I could look forward and up to something different. I had heard that siren call of Michigan, but that's the thing about the siren calls is that you have to be able to differentiate that music from the real music, the music of family, realizing what was important. Now, my son, he's now married. Him and his wife and his 3 stepchildren live in Boonesville, only about 20 minutes from my house. My daughter, she's married with her husband and Floyd, our 7-month-old granddaughter, our first grandchild. Not that she has me wrapped around her finger. That was the harp. That was the music that I was hearing. When I got to Roanoke, I joined Toastmasters, started a company or a club at the hospital. And so I joined Toastmasters, got some really good friends out of Toastmasters. And I was talking with some of those friends, and I shared with them that what was when I got to tell a story. And I said, well, do you know anything about Sounds of the Mountains? I said, Sounds of the who? Sounds of the Mountains. I said, Mountains? They had made sounds to me for years. They said, yeah, it's a storytelling festival over in Fincastle, Camp Bethel. Well, I came home, I told my daughter we were going, we're due. Okay. And so we went into Camp Bethel for Sounds of the Mountains 2018. Well, all I can tell you is that I went into the woods and I got bit by the storytelling bug. It went straight through. And my life hasn't been the same since. I went year after year and I started Storytelling Connections, and I started, let me tell you, and all of this with the idea of having something that would carry on, something that I enjoyed, and it wasn't that corporate climb. The harp is beautiful, but it's only when you put it with the whole orchestra that you realize that that's where the real music is. And for me, it was the storytelling and my family that is making that beautiful, beautiful music, that I'm not pursuing that corporate ladder anymore. I'm happy right here in Roanoke, telling stories, getting to meet wonderful folks like you, my family close by. Now, my son tells me that he may be moving to North Carolina in a couple of years. We don't know what that means, but I have the patience because I have the harp playing and it calms me. And I'm no longer pursuing all of that. Jack looked at me and says, well, it took you long enough to get here, but it sounds like you figured it out. Yeah, I figured it out. I don't know if I came to the mountains or the mountains brought me here, but these mountains, these Appalachian mountains, they're home. Thank you very much. All right, thank you. So our next storyteller is a very good friend of mine that I met years before we found out that we both enjoyed storytelling and got together in a storytelling event. And we knew each other. This was fantastic. So please give a warm welcome for Miss Teresa Calhoun.
He's a tough act to follow, I'll tell you that. Thank you all for being here tonight. From the bottom of my heart, I love telling stories, and I love telling stories when people are in the chairs. So I hope you enjoy tonight. Well, once there was an old widow woman, Widow Harmon, and she had two daughters, Mabel and Ethel. And this widow and her two daughters, they kept a hired girl. Now, this hired girl was bound to them. She had to work for a certain amount of time for them, couldn't leave. And I got to tell you, they were mean to this girl. They never bought her any nice clothes to wear. She had old raggedy clothes. They made her do all of the chores, all of the worst chores. And this poor little girl, instead of having a bed to sleep in, they put a mat by the fireplace, and she slept on that hard mat. And ashes from the fire would come and get in her hair and on her face, and they nicknamed her Ash Pet. Never called her anything else. Now, the thing was that they never let Ash Pet go anywhere, never to be around any other people. And if somebody ever came to the house, they would grab Ash Pet and they'd put her under a wash tub so nobody could see her. Because you see, the thing was, that old woman, that old widow woman, knew that Ash Pet was a whole lot prettier than her daughters. And she didn't want any comparisons being made. Now, one afternoon, the old woman and her two daughters were going to go to a church meeting. And Ashpet had been real busy doing all the chores, and somehow she had neglected the fire and the fire had gone out. Now, back in those old times, that was a big deal because you kept that fire going all of the time. And when you made a new fire, you made it from the coals of the old fire. Well, the old woman was just, we've got to go to a church meeting. You've got to get the fire going. We've got to get some coals to get it going because we got to wash before we go to the church meeting. How could you let the fire go out? So she grabbed the oldest girl. She grabbed Mabel and she said, you've got to go to our nearest neighbor and see if you can get a coal from the fire. Oh, Mama, that's that old woman that lives through the gap in the mountain. She's weird. Everybody says that she's like a witch woman. I don't want to do it. I'm telling you to do it. The old woman said, well, that girl knew better than to sass back to her mama. So she went a walking through the hollow and through the gap in the mountain. She was going up to that old woman's old ramshackle cabin, and she was going to get coal for the fire. Now, when she got up there, she didn't want to go in there. She didn't want to go in that cabin. They had things, they had money. This old woman had nothing. She didn't want to go in that cabin. And so she saw a hole in between the logs. And this girl stuck her hand through the hole and went like that. She said, oh woman, we need a coal for our fire. And from inside, the old woman said, well, honey, you come in here and comb my hair out for me, and I'll give you a coal for the fire. Ew, she said, I'll not put my fine hands on your old cat comb. Then you'll not get any fire from me, the old woman said. So that girl had to go back and tell her mama she didn't get any fire. So the mama grabbed the younger daughter and she said, you Ethel, go up there and get fire from that woman. Get coals. We need them. We got to go to the church meeting. She didn't want to sass her mama, so she went down through the hollow, through the gap in the mountains, up to the cabin. She saw that chink in the logs, and she stuck her hand through that chink in the logs, and she said, oh, woman, we need a coal for our fire. Our fire went out. And the old woman said, well, honey, if you come in here and help me comb out my hair, I'll give you a coal for your fire. Oh, no, I'm not going to come in there, not me. Well, then you'll not get a coal for your fire. So that girl had to go back and tell her mother, no fire. Now, the old woman didn't want to do it, but she looked at Ashpet and she said, you're going to have to go. These girls, they didn't do it. You have to go and get a coal for the fire so we can go to the church meeting. So Ashpet, to tell you the truth, she was kind of glad because she got out of doing her chores and she liked being outside. So she was walking through the hollow and through the gap in the mountain, and she got up to the old cabin. And you see, Ashpet did what a normal human being would do. She knocked on the door. And the old woman said, well, come in, Ashpet. Ashpet wondered how that woman knew her name. And Ashpet went in. She said, ma'am, somehow we let our fire go out. And I came up here to see if you could give us a coal from your fire so we could get it going because they want to go to church meeting. And the old woman said, well, honey, if you'll help me comb my hair out. Oh, I can do that, Ashpet said. So she combed the old woman's long gray hair out and put it up in a nice braid for her. And the old woman said, thank you, honey. Thank you kindly. My rheumatism was so bad today, I couldn't get my arms up to fix my hair. Now, you did something nice for me. You come and I'm going to get you the fire that you want. She took Ashpet out to the woods that were in back of the cabin. And there was an old rotten log out there. And I know you've seen these things. They grow on the sides of like rotting logs. It's kind of a toadstool-like thing. I hear tell they call them lichens or something like that. And what these country folks did, if somebody needed a coal for their fire, they broke that thing off the tree, and you see it was hollow down on the inside. And so they could take tongs and put the coal from the fire inside that. The person carrying it had something to hold on to so they wouldn't burn their hands. And there was fuel inside for it to burn so it wouldn't go out before they got home. So she gave that to Ashpet, and Ashpet started to go. And the old woman said, Ashpet, you want to go to that church meeting tonight? Oh, no, they won't let me. They don't let me go anywhere. I ask you, did you want to go to the church meeting. Oh, more than anything, Ashpet said. And the old woman said, well, honey, you watch for me. After that old woman and her two daughters leave, you'll see me a-coming, and we'll do something to help you out. Well, Ashpet, she practically ran home with that coal for the fire. She got the fire going. She started supper. She got the water heating up. She went out and she fed and watered all the livestock, came back in, finished ironing the clothes for them, helped them get ready. And soon the old woman and her two daughters were off to the church meeting. And there was Ashpet with all those dirty dishes. She started getting ready to do the dishes. She got the pan of dishwater and got ready, and she looked and she saw that old woman that they called a witch woman, coming up the path with her walking stick. That old woman came to the kitchen door and she said, honey, I want you to come out here now. Ashpet said, I can't. I've got to wash all these dishes. They'll be really mad if I don't get them done. Honey, you come on out here. I'm going to take care of that, the old woman said. Ashpet didn't know about this. She went out and stood outside, but she stood where she could kind of see what was going on in the kitchen. That old woman took all of the dishes and she put them on one end of the table. And then she put the dishpan down on the other end. And she took that walking stick and she hit it down on the floor. And she said, all dirty dishes, stay off the shelf. Get in that water and shake yourself. Wash, dish, wash. And every one of those dishes skittered down the table, got in that hot water, shook themselves around, got themselves clean, jumped up, shook themselves, made themselves dry, and put themselves away. Now, if you've ever done any cooking, though, you know that there were some pots and pans that needed a little elbow grease to get done. A woman had a way to do that, too. She hit that stick down on the ground, and she said, pots and skillets, handle and spout. Get down to that sand and scour yourself out. Scrub, pot, scrub. And every one of those greasy, dirty pots and pans went down the path that went to the creek where they got their water. There was a sandy bank there. Though they got down in the sand, and of course the sand was rough, and they rubbed around, and all of the grease and everything came off. They got in the water, rinsed themselves off, went back up the path, and put themselves away. And Ashpet was laughing so hard, she thought she was going to die. But the old woman wasn't done. She reached in her pocket, and she pulled out a mouse. And she put the mouse down on the ground. And then she reached in again, and she pulled out a piece of leather and a rawhide string. And she put those down over the mouse. And then she hit that stick down on the ground, and she said, go up, little mare. Whoa, now, whoa. And instead of a mouse there was a pretty little spotted pony. It had a brand new saddle and a brand new bridle, just the right size for a girl to ride to a church meeting. Oh, but that old woman wasn't done yet. She took Ashpet by the hand and she took her into that mat that she had to sleep on. And that old woman reached in her pocket and she pulled out a piece of cloth and she put it on the mat. And then she had 2 pieces of shoe leather and she put them by the mat. And she said, all right, Ashpet, you close up your eyes and you wish for something to wear to the church meeting. What do you want? Ashpet shut her eyes, and then she heard that stick hit the floor, and the old woman said, open up, look and see what you got. There was a beautiful red dress on that mat and 2 red slippers to wear with it. Ashpet couldn't believe it. The old woman said, well, come on, girl, you need to get washed up so you can go to the church meeting. Ashpet got herself ready. She put the red dress on. She put the shoes on. They fit perfectly. And she went out, got up on the little pony. And the old woman said, now, you come home and you get home before that old woman and her 2 daughters. I want you to take that pony and hide it down in the woods. I want you to take that good dress off and the shoes, and I want you to hide them. And I want you to put your old clothes back on, because that old woman and her daughters, they talk about me bad enough as it is. This is just between you and me now. I'll do that for you, Ashpet said. And she gave the old woman another hug, and then she took off riding that horse to the church meeting. Now, she was a little bit late getting to the church meeting. And you know how when you're late getting to church and you try to sneak in so nobody sees you? Well, everybody turned around and looked when she came in the door. But nobody knew her. Remember, she never got to go out and see anybody. Even the old woman and her two daughters didn't recognize her because they'd never seen her all fixed up before. Ashpet, she slipped down in a seat to listen to the church meeting. Now, there was somebody else at that church meeting that night. There was a rich man in this neighborhood, and everybody called him the king because they figured he was about as rich as a king. And this rich man had a son, king's son. Well, he'd seen Ashpet come in too. Now, I'm sorry to say that this young man didn't get much out of that church meeting that night because he kept his eyes on Ashpet the whole time. He thought she was the prettiest girl that he'd ever seen. He made up his mind he wanted to meet this girl. So he watched her when she left, and he saw her go out and get the pony, and she got up on the pony. Well, he made sure he got his horse, and he got up on his horse, and she rode off, and then he made sure that he caught up with her so that he was riding right beside her. And he started talking to her. And she started talking back to him. She really liked him. He was pretty good looking too, pretty good looking. But you know what? She remembered what the old woman had told her about hurrying up and getting home before the old widow woman and her two daughters. She had to get rid of him somehow. She had an idea. When he wasn't looking, she slipped her foot out of the stirrup and she flicked her shoe over in the brush on the side of the road. And then she rode on a ways, and all of a sudden she went, "Oh, I've lost one of my shoes. It must have come off somewhere between here and the church." Now, at this point, that young man would have done anything to please her. He said, "Don't worry, I'll go back and I will find your shoe and I will bring it to you." So he turned his horse around to go back and find the shoe. And as soon as he was out of sight, she took off galloping to get home. She got the horse and took it down and hid it in the woods. And she got in the house and she took the pretty red dress off and one shoe that she had left. And she hid them, and then she put her old clothes on. And by the time the old woman and the two girls got there, she was sweeping. Looked like she'd been doing it the whole time. They didn't suspect a thing. Now, that king's son, he rode back to where he left her. He found the shoe on the side of the road, and she wasn't there. He was heartbroken because he knew she was the one. He didn't know her name. He didn't know where she lived. All he had was the shoe. He had to find the girl that fit this shoe. Now, the next morning, he made up his mind to go to every house in that settlement and ask about any girls that had been at that church meeting. And they were going to try the shoe on. And he'd know when he saw the face whether it was the girl, one he was looking for. So long about noon, Ashpet was busy doing chores, and the old woman and her two daughters, they were laying around the house like they usually did. And one of the girls looked out. I believe it was Ethel. She looked out. "Mama, it's the king's son. It looks like he's coming up the path to come in here." Mama jumped up and she said, "Oh, girls, go fix yourselves up. Go make yourselves look nice." And she grabbed Ashpet and took her out in the yard, put her down, put the wash tub over top of her. And then she ran back in the house and smoothed her hair out. And when he knocked on the door, she let him in. Well, he explained to her that he had this shoe and he was looking for any young girls that had been to that church meeting and could they try the shoe on. And the old woman said, "Oh, both of my daughters were there last night, and I'm sure that shoe belongs to one of them. Mabel?" And she called the oldest daughter. Now, she came down and she looked and she said, "Oh, that's my shoe. I've been looking everywhere for it." And she snatched it from his hands. She said, "Wait just a minute. I'm going to go over here and I'll come right back." Well, she went out back where the butter churn was. And she got some butter from that churn and she lathered it all over her foot. And then she scrunched her heel up and she curled her toes and she managed to get that long foot of hers in that little bitty shoe. Now, she came limping up to the king's son and she said, "Look, got the shoe on." He looked at the one long foot and then he looked at the other foot that was scrunched in the little shoe. And then he looked at the face and he said, I don't think so. And he reached down to take the shoe off and he felt how greasy her foot was. And he realized what she had done. About that time, a little bird flew almost in the door. And the little bird said, grease your heel and curl your toes. It's under the tub the slipper goes. What? What? The king's son said. The old woman understood what the bird had said. And the old woman went, shoo, get out of here. The little bird flew off. And the king's son said, is there anybody else in the house that can try the shoe? And she said, well, yes, as a matter of fact, there is. My youngest daughter, come on here, Ethel, try this shoe on. Well, now, Ethel came and she'd seen what her sister had done. So she said, that is my shoe. Give me just a minute. I'll go put it on for you. She went around back to where the butter churn was and she cut that butter and she put it all over her foot. And then she scrunched her heel and she curled her toes and she managed to get her big wide foot in that little narrow shoe. And she came back and she said, look, got it on. Now, the king's son looked and one foot was kind of wide and the other foot was kind of scrunched up in the shoe. Then he looked at her face. He said, I don't think so. And he reached down to take the shoe and he felt how slicky her foot was. And about that time, that little bird flew down there again. And the little bird said, grease your heel and curl your toes. It's under the tub the slipper goes. Shoo, the old woman said. But this time, the king's son watched that little bird. And the little bird flew and fluttered. And then it flew right down and it landed on that wash tub. And then it looked right at the king's son and it said, grease your heel and curl your toes. It's under the tub the slipper goes. Finally, he got it. He walked over to the tub and he lifted it up. What are you doing under there? He said. Oh, they always put me under here. Ashpet said, anybody comes, they put me under here. Well, come out. Oh, I can't. I'm all dirty from doing chores. I can't. Come out, he said. I've got something that belongs to you, I think. Well, she came out. He handed her the shoe, and her little foot slipped right into it. Then she went in the house. And when she came back out, she had the red dress and the other shoe. She was the one, for sure. She took him down into the woods. They got the little pony, and they rode side by side back to the king's house. Now, they were in love, and they got married. And I tell you, after the wedding, that old widow woman and her two daughters were really nice. They were really nice to Ashpet. Now, one afternoon, the two sisters and Ashpet were up in Ashpet's bedroom, and they were talking about hair and clothes and things like that. And one of the girls said, Ashpet, it's hot today. You want to go swimming? Yeah, the other one said, we know where there's a good swimming hole. Oh, Ashpet couldn't believe it. Her heart felt so full. They were treating her like a sister. She'd never had a sister before. It was just what she'd always wanted. So they got their stuff and they got ready to go swimming in the swimming hole. They went down in a big old swimming hole, deep looking swimming hole. There was a cave over on the other side. Now, those two girls, Mabel and Ethel, they made like they were going to get into the water. They weren't even intending to. They were being slow so that Ashpet was the first one in the water, because those two girls, like everybody else that lived there, knew that that swimming hole belonged to the old hairy man. He was a hermit that lived there, and the old hairy man had made it known if anybody came and swam in that swimming hole, that he'd get them and take them to his cave. Well, Ashpet, you see, had never been around anybody in that settlement. She didn't know. She got in that swimming hole, and before you could blink an eye, the old hairy man came out of the cave, grabbed her, and took her back in the cave. And do you know that those two girls stood there and laughed, because that's just what they were hoping would happen. And they left. And here Ashpet was with that old hairy man. Oh, he was an awful sight, awful. And she thought maybe I could get away from him, but the water was deep, and there was a big old whirlpool right where it came up against where the cave was. She wasn't a great swimmer. She'd drown if she tried to swim away. There wasn't a boat or anything. What could she do? All he did was brag about how tough he was and how he could take on a whole army if he had to. Yeah, he said, my skin is so tough. I reckon if a rifle ball were to hit me anywhere, it'd just bounce off. I'm that strong. Just bring them on. I can handle any of them. A rifle ball can't hurt me anywhere, he said. Nowhere? Ashpet said. That's right. Well, there is one place, he said. Oh, she said. Yeah, you see, I got this mole in back of my left shoulder here. And I reckon if a rifle ball was to hit right smack dab on that mole, it'd probably knock me out cold. But it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen because I'm too big, it's too strong. Well, Ashpet remembered that. Not long after that, she heard a ruckus outside, and she looked out the cave. It was her husband, and he had gotten an army up to come look for her. And she managed to get past the old hairy man just for a minute. And she said, I'm here. Shoot him in back of his left shoulder. Well, the shooting started. I tell you what. And the thing was, it was just like the hairy man said. Those bullets, they bounced off of him. They didn't hurt him. And oh my goodness, he was strong. People were they were rowing across, and he could pick up the whole rowboat with 3 men in it and throw it back across the water. But the advantage that the king's son had was that there were more of them than there was of the old hairy man. And while the hairy man was busy fighting the ones in front of him, the king's son and 2 of his best marksmen made it around to the back of the cave. And you know what they were aiming for. They started shooting for that left shoulder. First, nothing happened, but all of a sudden, one of those rifle balls hit that mole. That old hairy man went down like a tree. He was out cold. It gave the king's son time to get his wife and get her in a canoe, and they rowed across, and just when the hairy man came to, they were getting to the other side. The old hairy man woke up and he looked around and he stood up and he said, bring me back that woman. Nope, king's son wasn't going to do that. Now, he got Ashpet back home, and once he made sure she was okay, he started asking her how come she was going swimming in the swimming hole that everybody knew belonged to the old hairy man. She told him. He was furious. He went right back down to old Widow Harmon's house. He arrested her, he arrested Mabel, he arrested Ethel, and he took those 3 women and he took them back to the swimming hole. And he pushed all 3 of them into the swimming hole, and he said, hey, hairy man, here's 3 women for you now. I reckon that's where they still are. Haven't seen them. But now Ashpet and the king's son, they lived happily together for many years. About what do you like about Cinderella stories? What is it that draws every culture in the world has Cinderella stories? Why? What draws you to them? What do you think?
Rags to riches.
Rags to riches. You know, we want to see someone with resilience, someone who shows kindness gets rewarded. Someone who shows cruelty gets punished. We like to root for the underdog. Shucks, UVA had the Cinderella team in the women's tournament this year. Do you hear that? They were called the Cinderella team. Now, just so you can do some research on your own, here is the book that story came from. It's called Ashpet. And these stories were collected in 1948 by Richard Chase. They were collected, as a matter of fact, Ashpat came from Wise County, Virginia. And Richard Chase put these stories, he wrote them down. Clint talked about, you know, how valuable it was to write stories down. And Richard Chase also wrote this one called Jack Tales. That's the one that Clint was telling. Jack and the Bean Tree, I think it's called, and it's in here. And then if you've got little ones, please, please, please check out these marvelous picture books. Do you know that ancient Egypt had a Cinderella story? Rhodosis was her name. Do you know that China, that ancient Egypt story, by the way, was in the first century, it was in the first century BC. This story was in like 800 AD. And even here in America, the Algonquin Indians, the rough-faced girl, marvelous Cinderella, someone who is abused, hurt, but they show kindness and they get rewarded. Thank you. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for Lisa. So yeah, these folk tales, they're called folk tales because they're told by the folk. Long before we had books and they were written down, they were shared with communities, and that's how they were passed on. And Teresa's right, they are in every culture around the world. Jack and the Beanstalk, estimated to be 5,000 years old. That whole collection is called, it falls under the collection of The Boy Who Stole the Ogre's Treasure. You know, so that's how far these stories go back. Now I want to introduce Hetty Farley. Hetty and I have been friends for a good long time now. Let me tell you, was kind of a brainchild of both of ours back in January of 2020. We had a couple of live shows, one in January, one in February. Anybody remember what happened in March of 2020?
Yeah. Yep.
They were against us. They did not want storytelling. But we did. We moved it online, and that's what Let Me Tell You is now. But I want to welcome a dear friend, Hetty Farley.
It's so much fun to come to the Salem Museum because I know that, one, you're such an engaging audience, but also when we tell stories, we are also sharing parts of history one way or another. And so that all is connected. I have been telling stories for, well, you'll know my age if I tell you how long I've been telling them. For many years. And the story I'm going to share with you tonight is one of my favorites. And it came to me by way of a girlfriend that was a roommate in college. She went on to teach English in a nearby college. And she had a class that she taught. And this was her textbook that this story came from. And when she finished teaching that class, that semester, she wrote in the front of it, mailed it to me, and she said, "You've got to tell these stories." I wasn't a storyteller at that time. I didn't really know what I thought. These are very cool stories, but I don't really know what she's talking about. But some years later, my son became to me, and then he got to be in school, and he was going through a difficult time. And so I volunteered, was working somewhere else, and I volunteered with the teachers. Would it be all right if I came to my son's class and told stories? Well, if you've ever been around elementary education persons, you think what they would say. Yes, please. And they also knew me. So I came in and I started telling stories. Well, in the course of doing that, always at Halloween time, always in the springtime around Earth Day, etc., some teacher came up to me and told me about the National Storytelling Festival in Jonesboro, Tennessee. "You've got to go, Hetty," they said. I went, a whole weekend of storytelling? That sounds like heaven to me. And so I went, and the bug bit me there. In the course of that, when I came back, I went back to that volume and all the other volumes of stories that I've been collecting my whole life that I didn't even know I was setting the stage for what I would become to enjoy. So I have a little Scandinavian blood in me, and so I've researched into some Scandinavian stories, and this is a story from Scandinavia. And if you know anything about that country, at least from the pictures that we see on TV or whatever, lots of water, lots of waterways, lots of coastline, some mountains, but it's, you know, the rougher terrain. And so the story begins with once upon a time. Once upon a time, there was a king and a queen, and they were very happy, except they did not have any children, and they desperately wanted children. Well, not the king so much. He was pretty happy the way life was, but she wanted children. And he said, if you want children so badly, why don't we ask our kinsman and just borrow a couple of hers? And she said, okay, that sounds good. So they brought two of their nieces over, and before long, the castle was full of laughter and giggles and ribbons and bows, and the queen was very happy with that. She loved the way the girls played. And one day she's out on the veranda and looking down into the courtyard, and her nieces are out there playing. But there's a third child, and very dirty child. And the queen was not going to have that. So she came to the veranda. She says, little girl, this is a palace courtyard. You cannot play here. And the little girl looked up at her. And about that time, the nieces went over and says, but we asked her to stay here and play with us. We're having fun. And the queen said, but. And the little girl spoke up and said, you would not talk to me the way you're talking to me if you knew who my mama was. And the queen said, oh, who is your mother? She says, she's right down there. She says, so? She says, she has special powers. Special powers? What are you speaking of? Well, for example, she knows how, if she wants to, help you have a baby when all else has failed. Well, that struck a chord with the queen, of course. She said, you tell your mother to come see me tomorrow for tea. We need to talk. And sure enough, the next day, this lovely, strong, tall market woman comes in to the palace, and there in front of the queen, and the queen says, I understand that you can have special powers and that you can help me have a child. She says, where did you hear that? She says, well, your child said that to me. She says, I can't believe a queen would be listening to the chatter of a child. The queen said, let me try again. Please sit down. And so the lady did sit down. And the queen and the market lady talked, and before long, the queen told her sad story that she tried everything. She wanted children so badly. Was there anything that the woman could help her with? She said, well, there might be one thing that might work, but you're going to need to follow directions to the T. You see, well, no harm can really come. You'll follow directions? The queen said, of course, just tell me what to do. She said, well, tonight you need to have 2 buckets of water brought to you, and you need to bathe in both of those buckets of water. And then afterwards, you need to pour that water under your bed. And in the morning, there's going to be 2 flowers under the bed, one fair and one rare. Now, the fair one you need to eat, but the rare one you need to leave alone. Do you hear what I'm saying? The queen says, oh, yes. Okay, I've got it. And that night, the queen followed the directions to the T. She had the 2 buckets of water drawn. She bathed with them. She threw it under the bed. And in the morning, there were 2 flowers under her bed. The queen was giddy. There was a beautiful pink flower and a very odd green flower. Well, the pink flower smelled delicious. And the queen just snapped it and ate it right up. But that tasted so good, she thought, okay, she ate the green one too. It couldn't mean that, man. It couldn't make that big a difference. Well, indeed, it didn't take very long before they did realize the queen was with child. And the pregnancy went well, and the birthing was about to happen, and the baby came out, and the baby was really weird, really odd, carrying a wooden spoon and riding a goat. And it started riding around the room saying, Mama, Mama. The queen went, oh my, if you're my baby, Lord, help me mend my ways. And the little child that's running around said, don't worry, the next one will be much more funny. And about that time, boom, another baby came. And this baby was so pretty and so sweet and didn't even cry, you know. The queen was very, very happy. She did get two children, sort of. And the two girls, the twins, although they looked very different from one another, they were inseparable. They did everything together. Where one was, the other was. They were always together. Well, the years passed. Now, the two girls, the differences are pretty extreme. The first child born, she was eventually called Tatterhood because that's how she liked to dress. She wouldn't ever wear nice, pretty clothes. I mean, they were princesses, you know, so they had access to some pretty nice threads. But no way was Tatterhood going to do that. And she was rowdy and raucous. And she continued riding that goat every single day, carrying that wooden spoon and thrashing things. That was who she was. But her other sister, the second beautiful sister, she was so pretty and loved dresses and ribbons and bows. They called her Dolly because she was as pretty as a doll. Well, the years passed more, and then it became to Christmas Eve of their 17th year. And their mom, Queen, and the two girls were in the Queen's room. And all of a sudden, there was all this noise out in the gallery outside the room. I mean, smashing and crashing. And Tatterhood asked her mother, what in the world is going on? She said, now, honey, just settle down, settle down. That's just the trolls. The trolls come every 7 years, and they trash the place. We have to just clean it up afterwards. They're dangerous. You stay put. Tatterhood said, what? She said, I mean, don't you go out there, Tatterhood. You be quiet. We've got to just let it happen. Tatterhood said, nonsense. I'll go take care of the trolls. You and my sister, you two stay here behind locked doors. Don't come out. And without another moment passing, she jumped out that door with her goat and her spoon, and she began thrashing and going after those trolls, up and down the hallways. Goat was a kicking and a button, and though she rounded up the trolls and ran them out of the castle. But when all that was going on, her sister was worried about her sister. So little Dolly back in the room behind the locked door couldn't stand it. She was hurt. She was worried about her. So she just peeked at that door just 1 minute, just to see where Tatterhood was. And in one whoop, a troll came by right then, took off her head, her bonny head, put a calf's head on in place of her, and took off with her head. Oh my goodness. So when Tatterhood comes back to the room, there's her mom, and there's her sister on all fours, mooing like a cow. She said, what in the world has happened? You attendants, what did you do? Why did you let this happen? She was just furious. She strutted around, called her goat to her, and she says, I'm going to have to go after the trolls. I'm going to go after the trolls. Her mother said, no, they're dangerous. She says, no, I'm going to go after the trolls. I will need a ship, though, full of stores. I'll need that. She went and talked to her dad, the king. Now, this Tatterhood had her daddy wrapped around her little finger, if you know what I'm saying. Her dad said he knew she was, well, just incredible. She was an amazing, incredible, unique child. So he granted her the ship. And he was going to have a whole crew go with him. She said, absolutely not. I'll take the ship myself. She took no help. So she and her sister go off to find the trolls. And they went along the coastline right to where the trolls lived. It was about to get dark. She tied up the boat to the hitching place there on the shore. She got on her goat and she ran right into the troll's house. The trolls were in there eating. She saw a little light. She peered through the window. there was her sister's head hanging on the wall. So in a thrice, she jumped through the window, grabbed her sister's head, jumped back out of the window on the goat, and down the road she goes, riding that goat to get back to the boat to leave. But of course, the trolls were right after her, and the trolls were catching up to her. And the goat was kicking in a button, and she was thrashing, and she finally got the trolls to just let her go. She got back to the boat. She put her sister's head on her sister, took off the cat's head, put her sister's head on. Her sister was whole again. They hugged. They were so happy to be together. They said, let's go see the world. And so they untied the boat and started visiting places all along the coastline. Different places, fun places, some not so fun. They finally get to a kingdom that is beautiful. It's lush, and the docks are nice, and everything looks nice. But they know it's not their kingdom, so they stayed tied up there at the dock. And Tatterhood gets on her goat, and she's riding around the boat, and her sister's tired, sleeping below. About that time, the king that lived in this lovely new kingdom with his two sons see that there's an unusual boat down there at the dock with an unusual sail, beautiful blue sail with something white on it. Could be a goat's head, not sure. So they sent down the messengers to go see just who is there, who has come to visit. Well, the messengers come down. They don't see anybody. There's no crew on the boat. There's no one but this odd creature riding a goat around the deck of the boat. And they said, ahoy there, ahoy there. Are you alone? Tatterhood took long enough to say, nope. She kept riding around. Said, well, who's with you? She said, my sister. She said, well, can we see her? She said, nope. And she kept riding around, pretty loud now. And they said, well, we think that you and your sister need to come and have audience with the king and his two sons. She said, nope. If they want to see us, you let them come down to us. And they left. The messengers left. They didn't really know what to do with this. This is very odd. They go back up to the king. They explain the whole situation, and the sons are listening too. They explained that supposedly there's another girl on the boat, and supposedly this odd creature has a sister, so maybe she's a girl, but they weren't really sure. They weren't really sure she's human. So they decide that they will go down themselves. Well, the oldest brother does. You know, he's kind of marrying age, and he knows all the ladies around, and maybe there's an opportunity here. So he does. He comes down, he spies, and sure enough, the beautiful Dolly's sister, man, she's up on the deck as soon as he's down there, and she and Tatterhood are talking and laughing, and of course, the beautiful Dolly has long, beautiful hair, and she's brushing her hair, and she has beautiful dresses, and she's dancing on the boat and just having fun. They're just having fun as girls. And the king's son, that oldest son, sees that pretty woman, that pretty girl, and he falls instantly in love. And he approaches the boat, and he sort of shares his feelings. And she said, what? Marry you? I would not marry you. I won't marry anyone until my sister marries. He said, your sister? Tatterhood? Oh, he couldn't think of anybody that would marry her. So he left kind of sad, and beaten down. And he gets back and tells the whole story to his father and his younger brother, what's gone down. But they decide they have to be social. They have to be nice. I mean, maybe they won't work out or anything, but they have to be nice. So the oldest brother talks to the youngest brother and talks him into at least escorting them up to the castle. So there they are. They are in the escorting. In front, the oldest of the boys is riding on his stallion, and Dolly's on the other horse. Beautiful stallions and lovely trappings and gold and silver. And right behind him is the youngest brother, who's now riding beside Tatterhood, who's on her goat. And there's the whole processional of all the other things that come with king's people, all the attendants, etc. And Tatterhood's on her goat. And their ride is a pretty good distance to get up to the castle. And she finally, it's quiet, long time riding. And Tatterhood says, wow, you're really not much for conversation, are you? To the prince. And the prince looks at her and says, well, what's there to talk about? He's kind of disgusted, and confused, as a lot of young men are with women. And he says, finally, he says, okay. Why do you ride that goat instead of a horse? She said, huh, I'm glad you asked. And since you asked, I want you to know that I can choose to ride a horse if I want to. And she simply taps the goat. The goat turns into a beautiful golden mare. He says, oh, that kind of got his attention there. He said, all right. I rode a little while. He said, so, all right, why do you have that tattered hood over your hair? I mean, don't you have hair? She says, oh, a tattered hood. Well, I don't have to wear a tattered hood. And she touched it, and it fell away. And beautiful reddish brown hair falls down, a silver ring around her forehead and head with little flowers in it. He said, oh, okay. Now he's really interested. This is very intriguing. She said, and? He says, and that spoon you carry, who carries a wooden spoon? What do you do with that? She said, oh, is it a wooden spoon? Well, maybe. And the wooden spoon turned into a wand with a gold tip made out of rowan wood. He said, oh, now, all right. I'll tell you. He's just smiling, sort of starts humming a little tune. She said, well, aren't you concerned about my clothes? I mean, I'm in tatters and rags and stuff. He said, no, I'm not concerned. I figure you are dressed the way you choose to. And when you choose to change it, you will. And she smiled. Bing. And all of her tattered clothes fell away. Beautiful green velvet skirt and vest and white blouse. They're getting closer to the castle now. And she's kind of, liking the exchange here. She said, well, and what about the soot on my face? Are you not concerned about that? He said, no, I think that's probably as you choose to. You'll change it when you're ready. And with one touch of the wand to her face, the soot fell away. And whether she was beautiful or whether she was plain, it doesn't matter. It didn't matter to him, and it doesn't matter to this story. But what I will say is that when they got to the castle, the festival that was held there, that went on for days and days and days, there were parties and games and dances, and they are still talking about it till this day. Thank you. But and you probably see some things that you've heard in other tales. And that Clint and Teresa were saying that a lot of this hotel is dated at least back to the 12th century. And it was told around fire pits and fireplaces. And it was told and kept and told and kept. And in Scandinavia, there was a stronger culture that's kept heroines, feminine heroes in their stories. And there are a few remaining in all the cultures. But what happened, though, is that generally speaking, the best of the storytellers in the old days were the women, because the men were usually working. The women were talking in the kitchen, and the women were working around there, making the sewing, and they're doing all that. But when the storytelling collecting finally got together, and the collectors were only once we started being able to print things. I mean, you didn't go around, you collected them before, but you didn't write them down. If you didn't write them down or record them, how do they get passed? So they asked the beginning question, we should write them down. So when they started collecting them, a lot of the collectors were men. So if you're a man and you're listening to a woman's story or a man's story, and then there's a whole lot of other reasons why a lot of the heroine stories are difficult to find, but they're there, and they're there in all the cultures, even in American cultures. And I sort of gravitated to those. I was like a 70s child, if you know what I mean. I was 50s born, 70s college, now movement, et cetera, and trying to be sure that we were treated equally, equal pay, et cetera, et cetera. And so I've always enjoyed those stories. But when I finally, in these last couple of years, have had the opportunity to tell two young girls, there's several camps around that are like for 6 to 12-year-olds or 12 to 13 or 15-year-olds. And I've had whole programs of just nothing but women empowerment, girl folk tales. It is beautiful to see how well it resonates with their what they're wanting to hear. Now, you may not like that story that I just told, and that's okay, because we're not all going to like the same stories. There's enough stories for all of us. But when you find a story that you do enjoy, and even if it's one of these tonight, make it your own, tell it, tell it, tell it. Just keep on telling. And if you want to know more about storytelling, or just to have a little bit of encouragement, just with your grandchildren or your family or your clubs that you're in, you can contact us. Any of us would work with you to help you develop your own story. Because the whole idea here is that as animals, and we are animals, but we are the only animal that does stories. We're the storytelling animal, and we gravitate to it, which is why social media is so popular, because we put these three facts together and boom, we make a story, and that's why storytelling, I believe 53 plus years ago, a resurgence happened in Jonesboro at the National Festival. A huge festival then was started with 75 people. It grew to 1,000. Now more than 10,000 come for 3 days and just listen to stories. And we go from tent to tent, listening to stories. They're not all folk and fairy tales. There's a lot of personal tales being told now. But I encourage you that there's Moth Radio Hour, there's a storytelling podcast, Appleseed Radio. There's a lot of storytelling out there, because what happens is when you start listening to a story and maybe you like it, you'll think of a story. Everybody has at least a story to tell, your own story. So thank you very much. And I want to ask you, do you have any questions? Any questions? No, okay, we're go ahead and on.
Any questions in general?
I didn't bring the volume that comes from. The actual volume is called Tatterhood. Ethel Phelps was the collector. Another more current day collector, her name is Jane Yolen. She's still alive. And she's done wonderful, in-depth, across the world kinds of, you read, she said, I think that she read 16,000 tales to narrow it down to the 1,600 she put in this book, So, I mean, there's lots of stories out there, but they didn't really get documented that well until, the print things. So, thank you very much.
Thank you. Give a warm round of applause for our hosts. We love telling stories. What we need is a place and people to do it. So I want to give yourselves a round of applause. So again, we are part of Let Me Tell You. I am Clint Atwater. My company is Storytelling Connections. Would love to connect with you if you are interested in learning more about storytelling. I'm hoping that we'll be invited back. They haven't kicked us out yet. So, but yes, please enjoy your evening. We'll be here for a few minutes if you have any questions. And again, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
And just keep an eye out on Salem Museum website and Facebook and stuff. And we'd love to see you at more events. Thank you for coming out.